This is the part that I find rather disturbing. My parents are doing something unethical and expect me to manage it. My parents, James and Linda, were the epitomes of success. They owned a chain of upmarket boutiques, which made them exponentially wealthy and highly regarded in our community. From the outside, we were the perfect family. Our big estate with a perfectly trimmed lawn and a view of the city was the envy of the neighborhood. My success was viewed as a result of hard work and a little bit of entrepreneurial luck, which made me question where the money came from. My parents have always been benevolent and tried to put forward a calm, controlled demeanor to every situation. When I was younger, I was always taken care of by nannies and relatives due to my parents frequently traveling for business. But with time, that changed, and they became more active in my life while pursuing my degree in business management. They spoke about preparing me to take over the family business, which was a good motivation for me to excel. I was thrilled with the idea as I wanted to continue the family legacy and make them proud. My thoughts on business greatly transformed after my parents decided to let me in after my college graduation. They always said that I will be part of the company someday, and I was excited from the very beginning. I knew that my parents ran a family-owned business, and I was more than ready to tackle corporate meetings and think over marketing strategies. But from where I stand now, it seems far more disturbing than anything I had imagined. The unnerving part is that my first day was filled with whispering and avoiding any sort of eye contact. To my surprise, the office was not what I had imagined it to be, and the culture was worse. Instead of calmness, there was a lot of tension in the air that was palpable, even in remote corners of the building. There were constantly rumors floating around the office, and the cherry on top was that my parents kept me completely in the dark. It was worse than I thought. In case you don't follow our channel, there is a chance you'll never get to see it again. But if you do subscribe, congrats. No matter when you want to, you will always have access to the stories that matter the most to you. My father, James, decided to address me that afternoon. He mentioned to me that he had something to show that was very important. I thought he was going to tell me everything related to finances or perhaps show me the strategic plans of the company. To my surprise, he drove me to a warehouse that was situated far beyond the city borders. It was an old, industrial building that didn't seem to blend in with everything else, especially with a company that was primarily focused on retail business. In the warehouse, I saw many operations taking place, but not anything that had to do with the fashion industry. Workers were moving around the area with high-stacked crates, and everything appeared to be conducted in a hurry. Some of the crates were being placed into unmarked trucks. My father then proceeded to a side office where my mother, Linda, was waiting and looking very serious. "Where am I?" I asked, a bit perplexed. "James," my father started to say, "this is the real backbone of our business." My mother then instructed me to sit down while she asked me to learn the truth. For the first time, her voice felt colder than usual. "The boutiques are just a front." "A front for what?" I asked, my heart struggling to remain calm. With a sigh, my father attuned himself for explaining. Everything from the boutiques to their high-end lifestyle showcased a level of wealth that was not authentic. The truth was far worse than that. It was a complex smuggling business. They trafficked everything including illegal drugs, using the shops for selling fake goods and laundering money. The business had a complex structure with warehouses acting as central hubs to stockpile and distribute goods across the country. I stayed put, aghast. My parents were not the respectable businessmen I had looked up to all my life. They were crooks. "Did you seriously build your entire life on this?" I asked, horrified. "Now you will have to take charge," my mother said, emotionless. "This is how we have taken care of you." The coming weeks seemed to emotionally contradict me. My parents told me to accept their illegal business as an inheritance and made me meet corrupt officials who were their contacts. They spoke about loyalty, legacy, and power. My father said while they poured money into their boutiques, my mother smuggled goods across countries. They were cold and matter-of-fact about the business and its supply chain, treating it like any other business instead of organized crime. "Trust me, this is for your own good," he said, which made it seem as if my reluctance stemmed from childishness. "You will get it in the future. Some people are powerful because they know how to do things others cannot." Everything I had known about my family until that moment was false was making me feel asked. I was brought up in a lavish environment and given a good education, all funded by webs of deceit and crime. My parents prepared me to inherit their empire, introducing me to a world where their lies had become my truth. I attempted to find a balance between our goals in the conversation. I tried to explain to them in a hopeful way, saying we are able to transform business and redeem ourselves. When we attempted to make suggestions, they simply laughed at us, continued to explain the narrator. My mother said, "This is the only way to exist in a world built on power and material." It became obvious to me that they had no willingness nor any ability to change. They've spent such a long time living in their specific life that they were unable to comprehend any other option. I happened to realize that they did not simply want me to continue with them. Instead, they expected me to do so. They believed it was my destiny to make their life choices. to take up the family's dark legacy. In life, everyone makes excuses for themselves, but I do not think I can ever forgive myself for the path I chose. I was born into a powerful family. Money was never a concern for me, nor was the law. The policies implemented in my country claimed to be made for the citizens, enjoyable for all, but were never truly functional. Such people in power gave me a chance to live the most carefree life, but I do not wish to keep repeating my parents' mistakes of being apathetic towards those who are not so privileged. Initially, it was simple for me to ignore the cries for help, but eventually those cries morphed into a deafening echo, everything blurring around me. There had to be something I could try to do. Had I gone through with reporting it, it only makes sense to say it would go extremely poorly for my family, and the authorities would never have held back claiming the credit for masking my life behind the myths and lies of my crimes. What was clear to me was that I was trapped in a gilded cage. With Herculean steps, I managed to gather enough information to turn things around. It was risky, but carving my way through the waterless reservoirs by taking pictures of document files and warehouse operations, as well as recording conversations, has been worth it in the long run. Everything came down to proving myself to being more than just someone's child. And while I was aware turning my back will be all but simple, I chose to believe parents are easier to deceive. They had the last laugh in that regard. Not because the premises were unfounded, but because I now know it wasn't simple for me at all. Nonetheless, it came down to power being the ultimate trump card. Having to live every day as the responsible heir within the family, I tried my best to learn the ropes of the business while secretly documenting their crimes. It was bone-chilling from all fronts. My true emotions were masked under layers of false pretense, forcing me to come to terms with the family business. The burden of giving everything up was like a tombstone on my chest. Staying focused was my only option. If they had ever suspected what I was up to, or worse, if they ever found out, I shudder to think what I'd have to face. Then, there was this one evening when I came across a conversation that shattered my already dying perception of hope. One of their associates was in heated argument with my parents about a so-called new venture they were looking to invest in. My heart goes out to the person who gets dragged into the human trafficking business as their new merchandise. The reality of their former merciless avatars took me aback. Despite knowing my heart goes out to them, I am dumbfounded at how at ease they are with using people as faceless numbers in a brand new empire. They were, at that very moment, dead my eyes. They had no lines. To even trade humanity for power was something they are more than willing to do. I can no longer waste time for the price I will eventually have to pay with share. The less time I have to give up for their next great atrocity, the better. I talked to a lawyer, Mr. Grayson, who dealt with organized crime. I had to be careful and used a burner phone. We arranged to meet in a public place where I would not be recognized. I told him my story and showed him the evidence I had collected. Mr. Grayson looked worried and his expression was detailed. "You are in a very dangerous position," he said. "If your parents find out what you are doing, they will silence you without a second thought. Be prepared for the repercussions." "I know," I said as I trembled. "But I can't stand by and allow this to happen. They're discussing human trafficking next. I can't allow that and have to do something." Mr. Grayson agreed to help me and explained the steps that needed to be taken concerning the evidence with the law enforcement and the terms of my immunity. It was quite the plan. There were different parts that needed to be completed with agencies that dealt with the organized crime issue. He told me the process would take time and that I needed to build a good case to get myself an immunity deal. The few weeks that followed were incredibly stressful. I attended the warehouse, the boutiques, and the meetings all in the pretense of being the perfect child my parents wanted me to be. I kept a record of every trade and shipment I made that is considered illegal and every conversation that I knew would be useful in the conviction of their case. Each day was a prize, a chance that they would not pick up on what I was up to. Then, one night while I was copying files on my father's computer, my mother walked in. Our eyes met, and she knew in that instant what I was up to. "What do you think you were doing?" Her voice did nothing to hide her anger. I could feel blood rushing through me. I was just browsing through some reports," I said while trying to close the laptop. She elbowed me aside, moving closer with anger written all over her face while I was getting ready for the game. "You are the traitor," she whispered, "after all we did for you." "Lies?" I exclaimed, shaking with rage. "You mean the lies, the crimes, and the lies you have destroyed? And you want me to rule this mess of a world?" She immediately faced me and slapped me. The pain was sudden and sharp. "You ungrateful child," she said dangerously. "We did everything to protect you, and you repay us like this?" As my mother, and subsequently me, progressed onto the increasing intensity of the argument, my father now walked into the room. My father's gaze moved rapidly all over the room. Me, mother, the laptop. The open laptop swiftly gave him a brief summary of the current events. After a few seconds of "what's my father thinking?" a silence crept in along with rage. There were too many undisclosed elements for me that led me to this situation now. "You really messed up," my father said, a hint of anger in his voice. Do you really think you can stand against us? Your family. Every ounce of me was terrified, but I stood firm and said, I'm not going to be a part of this, and I'm going to the authorities. I am defiant. My mother got up and lunged at me, but my father tried to hold her back. No, he snapped, sounding ice cold. Let her learn the hard way. I grabbed my bag, the laptop, and the evidence I had gathered before booking it out the door. After that, I knew there was no returning home or anywhere they could track me. That's why I reached out to Mr. Grayson. He scheduled a meeting with the federal agents for that very night. They accepted all materials I had, which included the files, recordings, and photos. I opened my mouth to speak, all of it. What I know about my parents' operation, the smuggling, the laundering, even the plans for human trafficking. They were listening and taking notes, which made their expressions seem even more grim. You have done the right thing, one of the agents said. But you need to understand your parents are dangerous people. They have connections, and they won't go down without a fight. The next few days were a blur. The authorities were swift, performing searches at the warehouse, the boutiques, and our family house. My parents got arrested, their empire was revealed in all its glory. The media ate up the story whether the parents were the central figure in a global criminal network. Bringing them down was my part of the story, and just like that, I became the traitor who turned against my family. The trial was long and awful. My parents' lawyers tried to paint me as a complicit participant who had tried to turn on them to save themselves. They pulled up every single part of my life, dissecting all of my motives and actions. But the evidence against me was too much. The recordings speaking with the documents and the other people testifying were already too much. My parents got found guilty of smuggling, money laundering, conspiracy, and a few other charges. Their sentence was decades in congruence where the empire once flourished. The saga of my life's peak, my crime, and the consequential trial is too haunting to live through. Moving forward, I did partake in the rituals of life, but I was nothing less than a shadow of myself. I spent several weeks, if not months, in a depressive stupor, until I compelled myself to enact a change. Life oblivious to me began to cease, and the persona I meticulously crafted had no use anymore. With all that being said, I shifted to a different city, which inevitably resulted in my family thinking I had gone die in a ditch somewhere. Moving cities did help as I was able to attain a social life. But this newly accrued life of mine came with its own barricade. There came a point in time where I could no longer ignore the elephant in the room, my parents. I hate to say it, there is no other way to put it. This dark legacy was something I knew I had a duty towards. While I made use of all the social contacts I acquired, it too was in vain as my old life came creeping back to the forefront. I knew the roots ran deeper than I invented. To get in touch with my parents is something I wouldn't dare. They had smeared my entire existence and gorged on my utmost efforts. The only option I had was therapy, which I am pleased to say produced its expected results. It was indeed a slow process, filled with moments where self-doubt and grief reigned supreme. I can only imagine what people wear themselves in inappropriately. But as light kindly made its way into this keyhole, my purpose turned into combating anti-trafficking. Using my dark knowledge against the empire my parents built was cathartic. Ultimately, I came to understand that family is created from choices and not just blood relations. My parents had set out to an overarching dark path and attempted to pull me into it. However, I made the choice to shatter the cycle and opted to live an honest life. It cost me dearly, but for the sake of my conscience and soul, that was a price worth paying. I do not come from an empire of crime. I choose to define myself, and I am in the process of creating an empire free from the shackles of my past.